You're not imagining it. Your groceries cost more. Your rent takes more of every paycheck. Your electricity bill climbs year after year. And you're told inflation is cooling down. It is. But here's what that headline doesn't tell you. Prices never came back down. Since 2020, the cost of feeding your family jumped 25% and stayed there. Your wages rose 17% in that same window. Prices rose 21%. You didn't fail at budgeting. The math broke around you, and it started breaking long before you were born. For decades after World War II, your paycheck and the value you created at work were linked almost step for step. The more you produced, the more you brought home. From 1948 to 1979, the country's output per hour climbed by 108% and paychecks kept pace, rising 93%. That meant if you worked full-time, you could expect your buying power to grow as the economy grew. Raises felt real. Each year, your work translated into a little more security, a little more possibility. Then, starting in 1979, the math changed. Productivity kept climbing, up another 70% since that year, but the typical paycheck barely budged. Hourly compensation grew just 12% over that same span. For the first time in modern history, your effort and your reward started to drift apart. The line that once moved together with your wage began to pull away, leaving a widening gap between what you make and what your work is actually worth. This is not a quirk of one industry or a blip on the charts. It is visible in the official numbers used by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. They track how much the economy produces for every hour worked and what is paid out for that hour. Before 1979, those lines nearly mirrored each other. After 1979, they split. By 2024, the gap between the value you produce and the pay you take home is wider than ever before. Your output per hour is now 1.55 times higher than your pay growth since 1979. That is not a rounding error, it is a structural break. The story behind this break is complex. Some of the shift comes from changes in how companies share profits. Some comes from technology, new trade rules, and the shrinking power of unions. But the result lands in your life the same way. You put in the hours, you get your paycheck, and it does not stretch as far as the work behind it. This is not about budgeting mistakes or bad habits. It is not about skipping lattes or cutting corners. It is about a system where your paycheck stopped reflecting your real contribution, even as you kept working just as hard. The numbers prove it. The rules changed and nobody told you. That is why the gap between what you earn and what you need keeps growing, even when you are doing everything right. The break between productivity and pay is not just a line on a chart. It is the root of why your rent, your groceries, your bills, and your future feel heavier year after year. The story of that break explains why, for so many, working full-time no longer adds up to a secure life. The rest of the story follows the consequences of that split, one essential cost at a time. Picture yourself in 1985, looking at a starter home in a quiet neighborhood. The asking price was about $83,000. That was roughly 3.5 times what a typical household earned in a year. With a steady job and a modest down payment, owning a home felt possible. The math was simple. Your paycheck, even if you were a public school teacher, could keep up with the cost of a roof over your head. Fast forward to today. The median home price has climbed to nearly $400,000. Median household income is just under $84,000. The old math, 3.5 times your income, no longer holds. Now that number sits closer to 5, 6, or even 7 times what you bring home, depending on where you live. The National Association of Realtors pegs the national average at 4.8 times income, but in many cities it is far higher. That gap is not a rounding error, it is a wall. To buy a median-priced home in 2024, you would need to earn about $100,000 a year, sometimes more. That is a full $16,000 above the national median. The standard 30-year mortgage, once a bridge to stability, now demands a down payment and monthly bills that swallow more than 30% of your income. Mortgage rates have doubled since 2021, putting even more distance between your paycheck and the front door. If you earn $75,000, the share of homes you can afford has dropped from nearly half of all listings in 2019 to just 1 in 5 today. The rest are simply out of reach. This is not just a story about averages. It is about the moments when you run the numbers and realize the math does not add up. A teacher in Denver with a master's degree and 15 years in the classroom earns $63,000. The local median home price is over $600,000. Even with perfect credit, she cannot qualify for a mortgage without a second job or help from family. She sits at her kitchen table, scrolling through listings, and each one feels like a closed door. It is not about lattes or vacations. It is about the basic calculation, what you earn, what you need, and the space between them. The housing market's old promise that hard work and a reliable paycheck would open the door to ownership has broken down. Price-to-income ratios have stretched past what most full-time workers can bridge. The numbers on paper become a daily reality, shaping where you can live, how much you can save, and whether you can ever stop renting. The feeling that you are falling behind is not a personal failing. It is the outcome of a system where the cost of a home has slipped out of sync with the value of your work. And for millions, including those in jobs once considered solidly middle class, the dream of owning a home now feels less like a milestone and more like a mirage. The grocery store is the first place you notice the math breaking down. You walk in with a list, maybe some coupons, and a sense of what you can spend. But the total at the register keeps climbing, no matter how carefully you plan. In 2020, feeding a family of 4 on a basic diet cost about $654 a month. By 2024, that same cart costs $976, a jump of nearly 50% in just 4 years. Even if you are shopping for one, the increase is impossible to miss. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks these numbers every month, and their Food at Home Index shows a 25% rise since 2020. That is not a blip. That is a new baseline. You try to adapt. Maybe you buy store brands instead of name brands, swap out fresh produce for frozen, or cut back on snacks. But the prices do not reset. The weekly bill stays high, and the only way to bring it down is to leave more things behind. The average family now spends $475 per week, about $24,700 a year. That is a quarter more than just 5 years ago. You might remember when a cart that used to cost $100 now rings up at $125 or more. The sticker shock is not just inflation headlines. It is what you see every time you check out. And it is not just you. The official numbers confirm it. The Consumer Price Index for food at home climbed 29% from March 2020 to December 2025. Meanwhile, overall prices for non-food items rose just 2.6%. Food inflation hit harder and lasted longer than almost anything else in your budget. Even as news reports talk about inflation cooling off, your grocery bills never really come back down. The new normal is simply more expensive. So you start making choices you never had to think about before. Maybe you buy less meat, or you skip the bakery section. You stretch meals, plan leftovers, or eat out less, not for savings, but because the basics cost more. Each trip to the store is a reminder that your paycheck does not stretch the way it used to. The gap between what you earn and what you need shows up here, in the aisles and at the register, every single week. And when the bill is higher than your budget allows, the shortfall does not just disappear. It follows you home, waiting to be filled by the next paycheck or the next swipe of a credit card. Your paycheck lands, and before you have even had a chance to breathe, the bills are already waiting. The card swipe at the pharmacy, the online payment for the water bill, the minimum due on the credit card, it all adds up, even when you are careful. If the groceries overrun your budget, you make up the difference with plastic. If the rent takes more than you planned, you pay the utility a few days late. That is not a luxury, it is a bridge, and you are not alone. Total credit card debt in the United States has climbed past $1.2 trillion. That is not just for travel or gadgets. Nearly half of cardholders now use credit to cover essentials, groceries, gas, the electric bill, or an emergency repair. The Federal Reserve tracks these numbers quarter by quarter. Right now, about 4.5% of credit card balances are at least 90 days overdue. That is the highest rate in over a decade. Student loans tell a similar story, with more than 9% of borrowers in serious delinquency. The gap between what you earn and what you need does not just disappear, it turns into a balance that follows you month after month. Utilities are supposed to be predictable, but even the basics are climbing. The average electricity rate has jumped from 9.5 cents per kilowatt hour in 2000 to over 15 cents in 2024, a 61% increase. Water bills rise quietly too, up 2.4% per year on average for nearly 2 decades. If you fall behind, the reminders come quickly: a past due notice, a threat of shutoff, sometimes a fee just to keep the lights on. By 2024, about 14 million households were behind on at least one utility bill. That is not a statistic, it is a late-night worry for millions. For a single parent, the math can feel impossible. You stretch every dollar, but a sick child means a missed shift, and suddenly the gas bill is late. For a retiree, a fixed income that once covered everything now runs out before the month does. The choices are never about extravagance. They are about which essential gets paid first and which gets pushed off to the next check. Debt becomes a safety net, but it is one that frays quickly. Each overdue notice, each late fee, each swipe of the card is another reminder that your paycheck is not the problem. The problem is that everything around you just keeps getting more expensive. The shortfall is not a failure of discipline. It is the math of a system where the cost of basics rises faster than your ability to pay. The illusion of security fades when the bridge you are building is made of borrowed time. You get your paycheck, and the number is bigger than it was a few years ago. Maybe you even got a raise last year, but somewhere between that direct deposit and the end of the month, the money just does not cover what it used to. This is not about losing track of your spending. It is about the difference between what your paycheck says and what it actually buys. Since December 2020, the average wage in America has gone up by 17.3%. That sounds like progress, but prices climbed even faster, up 21.2% over the same stretch. That gap means your real purchasing power has dropped by 3.2%, even if your paychecks look bigger on paper. The illusion comes from the headline numbers. Nominal wages, the raw dollar amount rise, but real wages, what you can actually buy after inflation, have slipped backward. This is not just a national story. The squeeze is everywhere, but it is sharper in some places than others. In Baltimore, real wages fell by 14% since 2020. In Dallas, they are down 12.1%. In Boston, the drop is 11.2%. You might see a higher number on your pay stub, but by the time you pay rent, buy groceries, and cover the basics, the leftover is smaller than it was a few years ago. The numbers are not isolated to one region or one industry. They show up in city after city across the map. The paycheck illusion is real. It is not about missing a budget trick or failing to stretch a dollar. It is about a system where your work is measured in bigger numbers, but those numbers do not keep up with what life actually costs. You are not imagining the gap. The official data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Consumer Price Index confirm it. Your paycheck might look healthier, but its power is shrinking. That is why the feeling of falling behind is not just a feeling, it is the math. The squeeze is not personal, it is structural, and it is everywhere. You might have grown up believing that if you worked hard, saved, and made smart choices, you would eventually reach the milestones your parents once took for granted. A home of your own, maybe a family, a sense of stability. But the math has changed so dramatically that the old milestones now feel like moving targets. In 2019, earning $75,000 meant you could afford nearly half the homes on the market. Now that same paycheck gets you in the door at just 1 in 5. The rest are out of reach no matter how careful you are or how many hours you put in. If you rent, the squeeze is just as relentless. 5 years ago, 38% of renters could find a place that would not swallow more than 30% of their income. Today, that number has dropped to 28%. Each year, the options shrink and the choices get harder. A first-time buyer sits in front of a spreadsheet, watching the numbers refuse to line up. The down payment is steeper, the monthly payment is higher, and the list of affordable homes is shorter than ever. Even with a stable job and good credit, the gap between what you earn and what you need has become a chasm. The cost of a basic family life keeps climbing. In 2024, the minimum income needed for a family of 4 to cover essentials, housing, food, childcare, healthcare, transportation, taxes, now stands at $121,000. The median household brings in about $84,000. That's a $37,000 shortfall before you even think about saving for retirement or an emergency. The price of entry for a stable life rises faster than your paycheck. Childcare alone jumped 7.7% in a single year. Housing costs climbed 10.6%. Even if you manage to keep your job and avoid big surprises, the basics keep getting more expensive and the gap keeps widening. Meanwhile, the share of the economy going to corporate profits has nearly doubled, from 6% to 11% since 2000. The money is still being made, it's just not landing in your check. You can check your pay stub, recalculate your budget, and stretch every dollar. Yet the gap remains. Right now, the average rent eats over 30% of your paycheck, and groceries cost 25% more than just 5 years ago. This isn't about personal choices or willpower, it's the arithmetic of today's economy. If it feels impossible to keep up, it's because the numbers don't add up. Share your story in the comments.